Good morning. This is the Climate Caucus, Climate Solutions Caucus Resilience Working Group. And today's mini panel discussion is talking about Vermont's climate future with a particular focus on forests, forest health, concerns about some impacts to our forests, and how we can strategies to maximize those values in terms of climate resiliency strategy. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lauren Oates with the Nature Conservancy. Lauren, would you need to share your screen? Lauren, I think you're muted.
It looks like she's just connecting her audio.
Okay. Lauren, are you still there? Well, perhaps what we'll do is, Lauren, as you get situated, we'll have Commissioner Snyder begin, if that's possible, and then we'll turn it over to you. We have limited time here, so I want to be able to maximize our time together. Okay? Commissioner, thank you.
Sure. Happy to do so, Representative Dolan. Thanks all. Happy to join you here. Always eager to speak to questions of Vermont's forests, forest health and integrity, and especially more and more of late as we understand the massive role that forest lands play in the global carbon cycle and in mitigating atmospheric carbon dioxide and climate change. So I'd begin with just a level setting of, I think it's important to understand that on the one hand, forests are, a major part of the solution, if you will, as the lungs of the planet, and providing this opportunity to absorb carbon dioxide. At the same time, forests are also very much vulnerable to climate change. And so they're kind of in this in both realms, in resilience, mitigation, adaptation, but also part of they are vulnerable. And we're seeing changes in our forests now, ecological changes in terms of timing of bud break, flowering, leaf out, flowering, and then associated cycles of insects that rely on that timing and birds that rely on those insects and that timing. So major disruptions in the normal patterns of sort of phenological patterns of forest growth and development. We're also on the other end of the season, so we're seeing an extended growing season, shifting meteorological patterns with ecological and biological impacts on forests and the variety of life forms that depend on forests, including people and a variety of animals, and not to mention plants as well. So ecological, biological disruptions, as well as kind of operational, cultural, social, and economic challenges we're already seeing because of climate change and its effect on forests and how we interact with them as stewards, as enjoyers, as managers. So we have this great opportunity to capitalize on our great forest strength, as I like to refer to it. But at the same time, we need to be acting now and being careful and adapting how we work with forests, what we expect from forests, because they are vulnerable and subject to climate change impacts now. So I assume you're all up to speed on the role of forests in the global carbon cycle, and why report after report and intergovernmental panel and commission and blue ribbon this and that, every one of them that's ever been, and every scientific study that's ever been has pointed to, first thing, keep your forests if you really want to have resilience and mitigate climate change. Keep healthy forests first. That's job one. And then we get into, okay, how do we do that? And for us, it's a range of things, a mix, an integrated kind of comprehensive approach that includes acquisition and protection for conservation of particular places, guided by things like Vermont Conservation Design, which I hope you've all heard about, building on TNC concepts, frankly, of resilient landscapes, kind of protecting the stage, and understanding ecologic function. So we would have interest in that, keep, first precaution of intelligent tinkering is keeping all the parts. So conservation, acquisition, et cetera, protection. Good land use planning strategies, and that's where the working lands come in. In particular, the idea of close, intelligent, local, ecologically based stewardship and management of forests as a way of keeping forests, providing recognizing the economic imperative and challenges that landowners face. So having a local marketplace for intelligent tinkering with your forest lands is very important. So we have conservation, we have working forests, and we have an exciting area for me as a forester is increasing understanding of adaptive silvicultural techniques, modifying our approach to silviculture, which is the art and science of managing forests for forest health and human use and goods and services. To think about, to be just basically to be adaptive to the changing climate, to changing forests, and to change our approach to managing forests, particularly with respect to resilience that is conferred by complexity, structural and diversity of species diversity, and leading to a complexity of forest structure and composition and function, and that being the most resilient. So you have this package of tools that is at our disposal right now. Modern approaches to silviculture that add sort of old complex characteristics to forests that aren't even that old yet. That's exciting. Much of that work is happening right here in the state of Vermont at UVM and elsewhere with partners. We're a world leader in that, frankly, more and more in modern, adaptive, climate-smart approaches to forest management. But that doesn't really matter if we don't have a robust marketplace and a culture of active forestry and stewardship. And that's what I would point you to as the biggest challenge right now. We have a historic record of land conservation that we should be proud of. I think we're looking to kind of diversify it a little bit and maybe make sure we're keeping all the different types. But we can look with pride to our progress on conservation. We can look with pride to our progress on developing intelligent, modern techniques for working with forests and the forest products that we rely on that have a climate benefit as well. And I would say what we really don't have and what we need to focus on is the legal, economic, and kind of policy framework that supports a modern forest economy. That's the third leg that we need here. And which is why we call for permit reform in Act 250 with regard to forest processing facilities, for example, recognizing they have a conservation effect. Unlike a box store in a development review, we would say that a sawmill, for example, particularly a modern sawmill, should be seen differently than a box store in the regulatory framework. So as an example of policies that we would propose and work with on keeping working forests working, and you need the marketplace and the culture and this sort of social license to work with forests. And that's the piece I think I would direct you to with the most promise right now for climate resilience. Hope that gives you a good sense of where I come from with the power of forests, the multiple co-benefits, and the sort of anchoring hub they are for landscape resilience in many ways, including climate resilience. And I think we have some possibilities for, basically making good on what we've inherited, and we still have a chance to get it right. And I think that's something very exciting about the forest sector. It's not too late, but I think we ought to be acting quickly and intelligently. I probably should mention, I mentioned to Carrie at the beginning, I've delivered a report on our progress to date on explaining forest carbon. What is forest carbon? What is the accounting of our current forests, greenhouse gas emissions and sequestration? And then a third piece is a primer on how to enroll and what's the possibility for enrolling in offset projects in the offset marketplace. So I've shared that. I think there's a lot of good modern work there. I want to give a shout out to our climate forester, newly appointed and hired this year, Ali Kasiba, who did most of the work there. So eager to continue to do our job as sort of credible third-party information to help forest landowners, foresters, managers of all stripes understand how this all works, what's at stake, what the options are, and sort of toolkits for holding it all together. So we take a lot of pride in providing that kind of information, and it's summarized in that bit of written testimony I've shared with you folks. And a lot more detail there on the forest carbon offsets, because I suspect there's interest in that. Gary, is that a helpful overview?
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner. Yes, and I'll share that report for everyone here So I appreciate that. And this is part one of this discussion. Part two, in a couple of weeks, we will be having the Land Trust, Nick Richardson, talking about carbon offsets as well and more in depth. So, so thank you for that. We'll hold questions till the end if we could, if you wouldn't mind waiting towards the end of the panel for questions. And I'll like to turn the conversation over to Lauren Oates with the Nature Conservancy. Lauren?
Thank you, Representative Dolan. It's nice to see all of you. I apologize for the significant technical difficulties. You'd think almost 11 months to the date in and working remotely, we'd have Zoom figured out, and yet here I am. I hope you all can hear and see me okay. Thank you, Commissioner, for jumping in first, kind of changing it up. I was going to open my remarks by saying the Commissioner and I didn't have time to coordinate at all on this. So if the baton passing when it was supposed to come from me to him seemed a bit inelegant, it might even seem more so now that we're switching the order. So I apologize for that. But I appreciate most of the remarks that I was able to catch from the Commissioner, which are largely supportive of what I intend to cover today. So while he just spoke to the just vast value that we have inherent in our forests, both from a climate mitigation and climate adaptation perspective, I want to support that and say how COVID and this pandemic has actually provided us an opportunity to really invest in our natural and working lands, and how we might use this pandemic and lessons learned to really make sure that we're protecting that natural resource. So I'm going to share my screen in a second, but I thought it might be helpful to kind of give you a bit of context from where I'm coming. I work with the Nature Conservancy. I've been there for a little over 14 months, but prior to joining the Nature Conservancy, I worked at Vermont Emergency Management for quite a while. So it was a strange time to leave in December 2019, right before a global pandemic hit, and all of my colleagues over there have been working on that kind of round the clock. But there are a lot of similarities between the COVID pandemic and also with just natural disasters at large, and obviously the very, very large existential disaster of climate change that is already upon us. So I thought I can't actually share my screen, so I'm just gonna look on the side and just trust that unless Representative Dolan can grant me that authority.
I'm gonna let you, I think that'll work.
You are sharing your screen.
Oh, how do I? Gosh.
Don't worry about it. I'll just read off I'll make sure that I hit my points, and I'll trust that I had some pretty pictures to share with you all, so you didn't just have to look at the Hollywood squares of faces. So again, like I said, prior to joining, I worked at Vermont Emergency Management and wanted to draw some parallels between how we approach the post-disaster recovery phase. I actually moved to Vermont to take a volunteer job with the town of Waterbury after graduate school to assist with their long-term recovery to Tropical Storm Irene. So I'm steeped in the value of really approaching recovery as a co-benefit approach. So as we look at post-disaster, we do something called like an after-action review, what went well, what didn't, and largely a vulnerability assessment of where our greatest vulnerabilities were and how to address them in a sustainable, resilient manner. And with a flood like Irene, it's pretty easy. You see Route 4 is washed out, Route 100 damaged, hundreds of homes destroyed or damaged, and really just tackling how we'd approach infrastructure and the built environment impacts. With a pandemic, it's a lot different. The impacts are pretty insidious. There are a lot of direct impacts, obviously, to our healthcare system, to the way that we're all working and communicating with one another, but larger impacts that we've seen to include things like the pressures on our natural spaces and our outdoor spaces, especially our forests and trails, and the significant increase we saw in people coming to the state of Vermont for kind of fresh air, natural spaces, time with our clean water, clean forests, healthy soils, and recognizing that there's a real vulnerability there though. as much as those natural spaces have provided us with some mental and physical health refuge over the past year in this pandemic, and before that too, obviously, there still is an understanding of overuse of our trail systems and an influx of people wanting to now move to Vermont, and understanding that extreme pressure that we saw on our local food systems and demand for local agriculture, and obviously the vast economic downturn that we're seeing applied in many different sectors that are going to have reverberating impacts on our economies. And so looking at it like that and seeing all of those direct and indirect impacts from COVID, there's a real opportunity, much like there was following Tropical Storm Irene in Vermont, to harness all of this moment to meet the demand of responding and recovering from the COVID pandemic, but also using the leverage that we have in this moment, both with an influx of federal funds, how we want to structure our state programs and funding our state programs, different policy opportunities that also address climate change. And there's so much value in doing that, especially with respect to our forest and natural services. So if you think about it like in the forest perspective, you have so many co-benefits in protecting our forests. You have the keeping habitat fragmentation to a minimum, so we have intact habitat connectivity. You have the carbon sequestration and storage opportunity that the commissioner mentioned is, in every single scientific report that you'll ever see on how to make sure that we're addressing climate change. There's the outdoor recreation piece, which is a huge part of our economy. There's the ability to properly connect new forest science and how we heat our homes and our buildings in that sector and the emissions that come from that, and also really revitalize a strong forestry economy and increase jobs in that. There's obviously also compact development that's supported through keeping our forests intact and really investing in that natural resource that we have. And that's all. I could probably go on, but I think I just listed about 6 different benefits just from keeping our forests intact and as forests. But obviously that jobs component would be huge, a huge part of our recovery, making sure that we're shifting our economy into something that's going to really be it's going to look sustainable. It's going to modernize both with respect to green and renewable energy, but also with respect to how we develop our land, how we protect our forests, how we protect our floodplains, etc. And so TNC a few months ago, actually many months ago now, but time is strange, started to think about how we talk about climate change in a global pandemic, and how we understand the opportunities for realizing those co-benefits, especially with, again, this influx of federal funds that we've had some of and we're anticipating more of from this new Congress and our new federal administration, and also leveraging this moment to really understand how we can change our policies and shift into a sustainable, resilient 2030 Vermont, 2050 Vermont, and looking forward. So we started to come up with a couple of priority areas for investment. We brought in a lot of our land trust partners, Vermont Housing Conservation Board. I have like 30 logos that I would share with you. Representative Dolan, I'll share with you. It's a 2-pager. If you don't already have it, I will share it with you. But the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, it generally couches our strategic investment in a couple of areas that center around career growth in a new economy, access to clean air, healthy water, healthy soils, healthy food systems for all Vermonters, and making sure that we're really investing in our natural and working lands, which have proved so valuable to us and our economy, our tourist economy, our food-based economy over the years, but especially heightened and especially vulnerable from COVID-19. So there's this real moment that we want to meet, and we want to make sure that you all are aware of these pretty robust opportunities, and really trying to couch all of the work that we're doing in this co-benefit approach, responding to COVID in a resilient manner, but also protecting our natural working lands moving forward. So I'm sorry that I wasn't able to share my screen with you all. Again, just imagine there were some pretty pictures and you didn't just have to look at my little box, but happy to answer any questions you have on that and or pass the mic back to the commissioner.
Thank you, Lauren. And I apologize. It's probably user error on my part on my inability to figure out how to pass the screen sharing over to you. So I too am trying to learn. But thank you very much. This is terrific. Just to kick off the question and answer session,
Yeah.
I have one question for both of you, and it has much to do with the fragmentation that we see across our landscape. The commissioner has, and his Department of Forest Parks and Recreation have produced over time studies looking at a trend analysis of the reduction in the carbon sequestration value, partly due to fragmentation. If you could respond to that, perhaps have the commissioner and you both respond to the question of fragmentation and its impact on our ability to maximize some of the values of healthy functioning forests provide. So perhaps we'll start with the commissioner, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Right. So fragmentation is the breaking of forests, quite literally, into smaller and smaller parts to the point where they become less functional or non-functional as forests. And so it begins, so it's a land use pattern, and it begins, when forests are first parcelized, and then multiple ownerships will first pass, and then some of those become converted into non-forest. That's fragmentation, when the forest itself is perforated and broken. And that's been documented as a trend of conversion of forest to non-forest to some extent. And I think we've looked at those data and those analyses and some of those trends with federal inventory and analysis data, localized data, work from VNRC and the Forest Roundtable over time to kind of assess all this. We've looked at drivers and have delivered a few different legislative reports to you over the years on this. So I think we've identified what fragmentation is, what its causes and drivers, and we've identified a series of kind of buckets or policy areas for protecting forest integrity, which is the opposite of fragmentation. And we're only now seeing more and more that good reason to do those things, because when you perforate the forest, fragment the forest, convert forest to non-forest, you do a bunch of things that are not great. You, including reduce our ability to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it in forests. So it starts there simply, and then it also starts to unravel and threaten and unravel the function, the integrity and function of those forests, and thereby reduce its ability to confer resilience to healthy waters, clean waterways, flood resilience, climate resilience, habitat, connectivity. It all starts to unravel. So fragmentation is real. It's been well established. We have a better and growing understanding of the causes and drivers. We have a range of policy options before us. We've addressed many, if not all or completely. And it's another reason to be concerned about it is the growing understanding of it's counterproductive to our efforts to combat climate change and provide that level of resilience across our landscape.
Thank you.
Our total, I think you made reference to our ability to absorb carbon dioxide going down. Is that of concern? I mean, that's a little, can be explained by some other things. In particular, it's fascinating, but one theory, I suppose, that's been put forward is the aging of our forests. As they age, the rate of sequestration, the rate of growth on a big tree is lower. And so we have this demographic kind of change in our forest too. It's complicated, but it's also fascinating. So there's multiple factors, but the good news here is that our forests are still sequestering and storing a significant portion of our annual emissions. That's the good news, and we want to keep it that way and enhance that capacity. Hope that helps.
Yes, helpful. Lauren, do you have any response? I have another question of a participant, but if you would like to respond as well.
Yeah, I'll just add, in addition to the carbon sequestration and storage value of keeping our forests intact, that habitat connectivity for both flora and fauna is really, really critical. The Nature Conservancy's old Eastern Division has done an entire analysis. The commissioner alluded to it earlier. It kind of feeds into the Vermont Conservation Design Program. It's called the Resilient and Connected Network. And how we protect our forests and natural, especially our forests along the green spine, for connecting sorry, trucks driving by, for connecting species, and again, flora and fauna from southern climes that need to have access to reaching northern climes as they continue to warm. In addition to that, forest fragmentation obviously reduces significantly the amount of water that our headwater storage areas can hold onto and retain. So in higher precipitation events, which we're expecting more and more water in Vermont as the climate continues to warm, and the trends in New England are showing much more water. We need to keep our forests intact also to store that water so that we can reduce downstream flooding in our developed downtowns and village designations, which are largely located in floodplains or near floodplains.
Yes, thank you for that. So often we rely on our floodplains to do all the work, when in fact most of the water is stored in our forest lands or upland areas. Representative Oates Oates has a question. Carol?
Thank you. I have a question about handicap accessibility and accessibility for older folks who might have, or any age, that might have trouble walking through or connecting with our outdoors. And what you might know about federal grants that the state might be able to access to improve that accessibility.
We've certainly done an awful lot of this in our state park system, in particular in ADA compliance. Quite proud of it. We've got some staff have won awards for their approach to all this. So that's largely where we drive at it, is always looking to understand that folks with mobility impairment represent maybe 20% of our population. That's an awful lot of Vermonters and guests to leave out of our parks. So we work towards making ADA modifications when we do infrastructure improvements or rehabbing or revisioning. And so whether it's a tent site, a lean-to site, a cabin site, beach access, we make accommodations. We make ADA compliant facilities, and we also make other accommodations for people with mobility impairments. So that includes just using the funding that we have, capital funding, for example, for infrastructure improvement, and we seek grant funding, and some of it sometimes can be specially tied to or get bonus points for addressing accessibility issues. So we're heavily engaged in it, embrace it significantly, have quite a track record of it, and including being creative about finding means to support.
Thank you. I have another question from Representative Burke. Molly?
And I guess this could be for both of you. Do we have, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Do we have adequate protections right now for forests? I realize some of it has to do with private landowner decisions. And is there any legislation currently now that we need to know about in order to support, or going forward, what would be some recommendations?
Well, I think that we're really lucky. I think I like to say that we're forest strong. I don't know that we've landed here 75% forested, 80-some% of that being private family ownerships, and largely healthy, intact forests, in really strong position. I don't know that we've landed here intentionally, frankly. And so I think we're lucky, and things have gone our way. And now that's why we've seen legislation proposing to include a lens of contiguous forest blocks and connecting habitat in the Act 250 realm. Like, let's have that lens. That's what I've signaled that in the fragmentation report in 2015. We need that lens in our land use planning and permitting. So that's why that's been proposed and nearly made it a few times. it's important. The current use program has helped us get to where we are. I believe the forest land category in particular, 2 million acres of Vermont family forests, largely in almost 16,000 parcels enrolled in the program. That's the most important, successful, impactful conservation program in our state's history. And it's got warts and, you know, a lot of duct tape and chewing gum, baling twine over the years, but it's really worked. I see Senator Clarkson smiling, and I think she knows what I'm referring to. And so, you know, I think supporting that, making sure that until such time as we have a replacement and we have a different approach to property taxation, we need a healthy current use program that makes sense. And it's allowed landowners to enjoy that tax equity and be able to keep forest, and also contribute locally to the economy. So those would be two areas that I think we're in a good shape. And I think, you know, we've been talking about some policy tweaks that would further ensure a more intentional approach to keeping the benefits of a forest strong landscape into the future.
Thank you. Well, we're a minute over my target of finishing up at 12:30. I did notice.
Carrie, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I don't. First of all, thank you guys, both of you. And Lauren, if you could get us statistics on how much more our forests and parks have been used during the pandemic, that would really be helpful, because it's always great fodder for our discussions about the value of these lands. And I'd just like to say, I think sadly current use has also contributed to the fragmentation of our forests. You know, anytime you create a program that has a parcel size, everybody gears themselves towards that. So I think that's one of our challenges with current use, quite frankly. And the Senate passed a very robust forest fragmentation bill last year, which I hope will be incorporated into the Act 250 bill. Is Michael still with us?
I am, yeah. And
oh yeah, there you are.
That's what I was referring to. I mean, it passed both chambers. The governor vetoed it after we supported it early in the session, and his message was that, you know, he vetoed the fragmentation language and the trails piece because it didn't include the other things that he wanted. I'd like to think it was not because he didn't like the fragmentation stuff, because, as I say, that's been something I've championed for years, and we supported in the original H926 in the House last winter. So yes, the policy discussion has happened. I think that's the good news, is we've all kind of come to see the reality there. And my hope and sense is that that'll come back and we'll get to that.
Thank you. And I know that Representative Till had his hand up at one point. Are you fine there, Representative Till or Representative Austin, for last minute questions? Well, with that silence, I want to thank everyone for participating, and I particularly want to thank the Commissioner and Ms. Oates from Nature Conservancy. It was a very informative, very helpful conversation. We look forward to the second part of this discussion, which is going to look at carbon markets and credits. And that discussion will take place in 2 weeks' time. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. And I appreciate it once again for you rearranging your schedule to accommodate us, Commissioner. Thank you.